There's a 119-mile stretch of California farmland between Madera and Bakersfield that might be the most expensive construction project per mile of actual functionality in American history. And I'm not exaggerating for effect here. We're talking about billions of dollars spent on viaducts that cross over empty fields, bridge structures that connect nothing to nothing, and a railway corridor where you still can't ride a train 15 years after voters approved the money to build it. This is California's high-speed rail project, and if you live in the Central Valley, you've probably driven past these massive concrete structures rising out of the farmland and wondered what exactly you're looking at. Because from the highway, it looks like infrastructure. It looks like progress. It looks like something is actually being built. But here's what makes this different from every other delayed infrastructure project in America. This isn't a bridge that opened late. This isn't a subway line that went over budget. This is $4 billion spent on a railway segment that, as of now, still has no operational track, despite over a decade and a half of construction activity. Let me be clear about what we're dealing with here. In 2008, California voters approved an $8 billion bond measure to build a high-speed rail system that would eventually connect San Francisco to Los Angeles. The promise was simple and incredibly appealing. You'd be able to travel between the two cities in under 3 hours. No flying, no sitting in traffic on the 5 for 6 hours. Just smooth, European-style high-speed rail cutting through the Central Valley at over 200 miles per hour. The projected cost at the time was around $33 billion for the entire system. The timeline suggested the first segment could be operational by 2020. And the plan was to start construction in the Central Valley, that relatively flat, relatively empty stretch between the Bay Area and Southern California, because it would be the easiest place to build. Fewer expensive property acquisitions, less geographical complexity, a proof of concept that would demonstrate the project was viable before tackling the really difficult mountain crossings and urban segments. That was the plan anyway. So what actually happened? Well, construction did start in the Central Valley. The California High-Speed Rail Authority did acquire land. They did break ground. They did start building structures. And that's where things get strange, because what they built is a collection of increasingly expensive pieces of infrastructure that don't yet form a functioning transportation system. Drive through Fresno or Madera County today, and you'll see these massive elevated viaducts, some of them stretching for miles. You'll see bridge structures over highways and existing rail lines. You'll see retaining walls and graded corridors, and it genuinely looks impressive from a distance. These are substantial concrete structures, the kind of thing that looks like serious infrastructure investment. But here's the thing nobody mentions in the official progress reports. As of the most recent assessments, this Central Valley segment still doesn't have track laid. It doesn't have the electrical systems needed to power high-speed trains. It doesn't have the signaling systems that would actually allow trains to operate safely. What it has is a very expensive foundation for a railway that might someday exist. And the costs just kept climbing. That initial $33 billion estimate for the full system, the authority's own projections eventually ballooned past $100 billion. The timeline for completion kept getting pushed back. 2020 came and went, with no operational segment. The scope of the initial operating segment kept shrinking. At various points, officials discussed opening a segment from Merced to Bakersfield, then just Madera to Bakersfield, then potentially just running conventional diesel trains on whatever gets completed first. You might be wondering how this happens. How does a state spend over $4 billion over 15 years and not produce a single mile of functioning high-speed rail? Part of the answer is that building anything in California has become phenomenally expensive. Environmental reviews, labor agreements, design changes, utility relocations, property acquisition disputes. Every single aspect of this project reportedly encountered delays and cost overruns that multiplied the original estimates. And unlike private construction projects where delays can be catastrophic for profitability, public infrastructure projects can drift for years or even decades as long as there's political will to keep the funding flowing. The Central Valley segment faced particular challenges. Agricultural land that seemed simple to acquire turned into lengthy negotiations and legal battles. Utility companies needed years to relocate power lines and pipelines. Design standards kept changing as engineers refined what a true high-speed rail system would require. And unlike countries like Spain or Japan that already had institutional knowledge about building these systems, California was essentially learning as it went. But the deeper issue is structural. The decision to start in the Central Valley, which seemed logical from an engineering perspective, created a political nightmare. Because even if this segment gets completed tomorrow, it would connect Madera to Bakersfield, two cities that very few people need to travel between at high speed. The segment doesn't reach the Bay Area. It doesn't reach Los Angeles. It doesn't connect to the urban population centers that would actually generate ridership. So California found itself in this bizarre position, where it was spending billions to build the middle of a railway before building the ends that would make the middle useful. Critics started calling it the train to nowhere, and honestly, it's hard to argue with that characterization when you're looking at elevated viaducts in the middle of farmland with no clear timeline for when they'll connect to anywhere people actually want to go. The political dynamics made everything worse. Supporters of the project didn't want to admit the challenges because that would validate critics who said the whole thing was a boondoggle from the start. Critics couldn't acknowledge any progress because that would undermine their argument that the project should be canceled entirely. And everyone in the middle, including the taxpayers, actually funding this through bonds and federal grants, just watched the costs rise and the timelines extend with no clear accountability. There were moments when it seemed like the project might actually gain momentum. Federal funding came through during the Obama administration. The state legislature allocated additional money. Construction activity increased visibly in the Central Valley. But each burst of progress seemed to reveal new challenges and new costs that pushed the finish line further away. And here's what really frustrates people who live in California and pay the taxes that fund this project. It's not that building high-speed rail is impossible. It's that other places have done it successfully. And California, with all its wealth and engineering talent and supposed innovation, can't seem to figure it out. Spain built thousands of miles of high-speed rail for a fraction of what California has spent on this unfinished Central Valley segment. As of now, the California High-Speed Rail Authority continues to insist the project is moving forward. They point to the structures being built, the contracts being awarded, the workers employed on the construction sites, and all of that is technically true. Things are being built, concrete is being poured, money is being spent. But what California doesn't have, 15 years after voters approved the funding, is a place where you can buy a ticket and ride a high-speed train. What it has instead is perhaps the most expensive monument to the gap between infrastructure, ambition, and execution in modern American history. Billions spent on bridges over farmland, waiting for a railway that might never come.